Sergeant Elias Brooks stood guard in the small outpost on the edge of the galaxy. The stars above were as quiet as the night, but something in the air told him that something was coming. He had seen this before, the feeling of tension. It was the kind of feeling soldiers lived with, even if they didn't want to admit it. The outpost was located on a planet far from Earth, on the edge of a new frontier where the Aurelian Empire, a powerful alien race, had just begun to make contact with humanity. This planet was a place of peace talks, a place for diplomacy. At least, that's what the humans were told. Elias had never been one to trust politicians, especially after what happened to his village back home. He couldn't shake the memory of the Aurelians' invasion years ago. He had been a child then, not old enough to fight, but old enough to understand the terror. The war had torn apart his village, yet the Aurelians had spared him. He would never forget the face of the Aurelian princess, Serana. She had stood in front of his family's house, her voice calm as she ordered her troops to cease their fire. It was strange. Why would they spare a helpless human child? Now, as a soldier, Elias was far from the small boy he had been. He had grown into a seasoned warrior, toughened by the harsh training and battles. But the memories of that day were still fresh in his mind. When he was called to the outpost to help protect the royal family, he didn't expect the past to come, rushing back. It was a quiet day, and Elias was patrolling the outer perimeter when everything changed. The air filled with an eerie silence before all hell broke loose. "Intruders!" shouted a voice over his communicator. Elias didn't need to ask who they were. The unmistakable sound of blaster fire echoed through the distance. A sudden burst of red light lit the dark sky, and the outpost's defense systems began to wail, warning of an attack. Elias's heart skipped a beat. Princess Serana, the very same one who had spared his life years ago, was in danger. Without thinking, Elias sprinted toward the royal compound. He could see the shadows of soldiers moving quickly, trying to protect the princess. But the attackers were fast, too fast for the guards to handle. Elias's training kicked in. He ducked behind cover, scanning the battlefield. The princess's guards were already outnumbered. The Aurelian princess herself, elegant and regal even in the chaos, stood near the center of the compound, defying the attackers' blaster fire. As her soldiers formed a protective circle around her, Elias had no time to think. He grabbed his blaster and fired, taking down one of the attackers. He moved swiftly, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay one step ahead of the enemies. The fight was intense, but Elias's focus was clear. He had to get to the princess, Asbal. He neared her position. An explosion shook the ground beneath him. He dove behind a stone pillar for cover, his heart pounding. Through the smoke, he saw Serana. She was not afraid. She was standing tall, commanding her guards with the confidence that only a royal could have. But her eyes locked on Elias, and for a moment, everything else seemed to disappear. "Elias," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. "You shouldn't be here. Get to safety." But Elias didn't listen. He couldn't. Not when the person who had once saved his life was in danger. He moved closer, firing at the enemy forces as he went. He reached Serana's side, pushing through the remaining attackers, his military training guiding every step. The princess's guard was slowly being overrun. Elias looked around, trying to assess the situation. "We need to get you to safety." "Princess!" he shouted. Serana shook her head, her golden eyes fierce. "No, we fight! I won't let them take this planet!" Elias understood the royal pride that ran deep in her veins, but he also understood the reality of the situation. The enemy was too powerful. If they didn't leave now, they would be caught in a trap. Suddenly, a blaster shot rang out, striking one of Serana's guards. The man fell to the ground with a thud. Elias's instincts screamed at him. Without thinking, he pushed Serana to the ground, shielding her with his body. Another shot came, missing by inches. Elias gritted his teeth. He wasn't about to let the princess fall here, not while he had breath in his body. A surge of adrenaline rushed through him. He fired his blaster again, hitting one of the attackers in the chest. But there were too many. Elias knew they had to leave, now. "Princess, it's over," Elias said, his voice hard. "We have to get you to safety, or none of us are going to survive this." Serana hesitated for a moment, her pride warring with the reality of the situation. But when she looked around at the chaos, the fallen soldiers, she finally nodded. Elias grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the hidden escape route. They sprinted through the corridors of the royal compound, dodging explosions and blaster fire. With each passing second, the sound of battle grew louder behind them. But Elias pushed forward, his focus unwavering. As they neared the underground, "Tunnels," Serana spoke. "You saved me once, Elias," she said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "But why? Why risk your life for me? For my people?" Elias glanced at her, his face set in determination. "Because once you spared mine," he said simply, "and I don't forget that." Just as they reached the tunnel entrance, the remaining attackers caught up to them. A blaster shot grazed Elias's shoulder, but he kept moving, pulling Serana into the dark tunnel. The sounds of war faded as they descended into the depths, but Elias's mind raced. The princess was safe, for now. But he knew this was only the beginning. The stakes had just grown much higher, and Elias had no idea what he was walking into next. The underground tunnels were dark and silent, as Elias and Serana hurried deeper into the heart of the compound. The distant sounds of battle still echoed above them, but for now, they were safe. Elias's heart raced in his chest, but his training kept him focused. His hand was still on Serana's, guiding her through the twisting corridors. Serana, though a princess, seemed just as determined as Elias. Her usual royal composure had been replaced with the urgency of someone who had just barely escaped death. Her golden eyes, full of fire and resolve, flickered to Elias as they moved. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady but edged with emotion. "You saved my life again." Elias glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't used to hearing thanks from anyone, especially not royalty. "It's nothing. You saved me before. It's the least I could do." They reached a small, hidden room deep within the compound, away from the danger. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss. Elias leaned against the wall, catching his breath. His shoulder throbbed from the grazed wound, but he didn't let it show. Serana, on the other hand, seemed unaffected, although there was a heavy weight in her eyes. "What's the plan now?" Elias asked, his voice low. "The enemies are still out there, and we don't know how long we have before they break through." "Here." Serana stood in front of a large hollow map that displayed a topographical layout of the planet's surface. Her fingers traced over the glowing lines, her mind working fast. "We'll hold here for now," she said. "But we need to leave the planet. The Empire won't be able to defend itself without me, and I won't let it fall. I've worked too hard to make sure peace will prevail." Elias nodded. He understood her desire to protect her people, but something about the way she spoke told him that there was more going on here than just survival. "You're the target, aren't you?" Elias asked, his voice serious. Serana looked up at him, her gaze piercing. "Yes," she said quietly, "but it's not just about me. It's about everything I represent, the throne, the future of my people." Elias had no idea what kind of politics the Aurelians followed, but he knew that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. In that moment, he realized that protecting Serana might mean far more than just saving her life. "You said you would leave," Elias said. "Where would we go?" She hesitated for a moment, then looked back at the map, her fingers dancing over it. "I have a place," she said slowly, "far from here. If we can make it, we'll be safe. But we need to move quickly." "How do we get there?" Elias asked. He wasn't going to let her out of his sight, not after everything they had just been through. Serana hesitated again. There's a ship in a secret location. Only a few know about it, and it's our best chance to escape. The air was thick with the weight of the situation. Elias knew that escaping the compound wouldn't be easy. The enemy would be looking for them, and they wouldn't stop until they had Serana in their grasp. But for now, their best option was to leave. "We'll need a plan," Elias said, stepping closer. "You can't fight alone anymore, and we need to stick together." Serana met his gaze, her face softening for a moment. She gave a small nod, but then her expression hardened again, as if pushing down her emotions. "You're right, but it's more than just a fight for survival. I need you to understand what's at stake here, Elias." Elias raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Serana's lips parted as if she was about to say something important, but she paused. "What if I told you I want to make you king?" The words hit Elias like a punch to the chest. He blinked, staring at her in disbelief. "What? King? Of what?" "My people," she said, her voice steady but filled with an unshakable resolve. "I want to make you king of the Aurelian Empire." Elias shook his head. "I don't understand. I'm just a soldier. I'm human. I'm not royalty." "I know," Serana replied, her voice calm. "But you are a hero, Elias. You saved my life when I was a child, and you just saved me again. You have something that none of the Aurelians have: courage, honor, and a heart willing to do what's right, even when the odds are against you. My people need a leader who understands that." Elias was stunned. The thought of being a king was ridiculous. He had never even considered it. He had always been just a soldier, someone who followed orders and did his duty. Now he was being offered a crown that came with responsibilities he didn't feel ready for. I'm not fit for that kind of power," Elias said, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm just a soldier," Serana smiled gently. "That's exactly why you're the right choice." "But why me?" Elias asked, his mind spinning. "Why not someone from your royal bloodline?" "Because they're all too busy with their own interests," she said bitterly. "Too caught up in politics and power. I need someone who's willing to do what's necessary to protect the people, not just their title. Someone who sees the bigger picture." Elias was quiet for a long moment. He had never thought of himself as anything more than a soldier. And now, the idea of leading an entire empire felt impossible. He wasn't sure if he could do it. But the way Serana looked at him, her eyes filled with faith and hope, made him reconsider. "You want me to become king?" Elias asked slowly. Serana nodded, her face serious. "Yes, and if you accept, we can make it happen. Together." Elias looked at the hollow map again, trying to think beyond the immediate danger. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The future of the Aurelian Empire, maybe even the future of the human race, could rest in his hands. "All right," he said finally, his voice filled with determination. "I'll do it. I'll help you, Serana. But I need you to know this. I won't let anyone take your throne from you, not while I'm still breathing." Serana's face softened into a rare smile. "Then we have a deal, Elias." The two of them stood together in the silence of the room, their fates now bound by a promise that would change the course of their lives and the future of two worlds. This part further develops Elias and Serana's bond, while introducing the surprising and weighty offer to make him king. It keeps the story moving with tension and drama, as well as emotional depth. Let me know what you think. The hidden room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the emergency lighting. Elias stood by the door, his back against the cold metal, processing what had just happened. Serana's proposal still echoed in his mind. King? The very idea felt impossible. How could someone like him, just a soldier, lead an entire empire? But Sarana had made her case, and despite his doubts, he couldn't ignore the weight of her words. They had no time to waste. The enemy was still out there, closing in on the compound. Sarana, though she was a princess, had lost much of her royal guard, and the remaining soldiers were under heavy fire. Elias knew that if they didn't act soon, it would be too late for both of them. "How do we get to the ship?" Elias asked, breaking the silence. He turned his attention back to Sarana, who was now studying the star map that flickered in the air above her. Her eyes moved across the layout of the planet, her fingers tapping the surface of the glowing map. She glanced up at him, her expression calm but determined. "There are multiple ways out of the compound, but all are heavily guarded. The main exit is too dangerous, and the rebels know about the underground tunnels. We have to find another way." Elias nodded. He knew there was no perfect escape. They were walking right into the lion's den, but he had been in tight situations before. If they wanted to survive, they would have to use their wits. "We need help," he said. "We can't do this alone. We'll never make it without some kind of backup." Sarana looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Backup? Who would help us? My own people are divided. Many are loyal to my throne, but the rest have turned against me." Elias crossed his arms, thinking hard. "I know someone. Valora. She's an Aurelian warrior, one of the Empress's top generals. We fought against her before, during the war. But there's something different about her. She's not like the others. She knows how to lead." Sarana's eyes narrowed. "Valora? Are you sure? She could be loyal to the Empress. She could easily betray us." "I don't think so," Elias said, shaking his head. "I've seen her. She's not about power. She fights for survival, and she has a strong sense of justice. If anyone can help us get to the ship, it's her." Sarana hesitated for a moment, but then her gaze softened. "All right, if you trust her, we'll find her. But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more time the rebels have to catch us." Elias turned, checking the hallway once more. "Let's go then." They moved through the compound in silence, careful not to draw attention. The corridors were eerily quiet, but the faint sounds of blaster fire still echoed in the distance. Elias and Sarana both knew that time was running out. After what felt like hours, they finally reached a secure room where they could contact Valora. Sarana took a deep breath before activating the communicator. The device flickered to life, displaying an encrypted connection. A few moments later, a stern voice came through the speaker. "This is Valora. Who's calling?" Elias stepped forward, his voice firm. "It's Elias Brooks. I need your help." For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then a low chuckle echoed through the communicator. "Elias, the human soldier who saved the princess? I never thought I'd hear from you again." Elias gritted his teeth. "This isn't a social call, Valora. We need help. The rebellion's forces are closing in, and we have no way out. We need to reach the ship on the northern continent, but we can't do it alone." Valora was quiet for a moment before replying. "Why would I help you? And why would I help her?" Her voice was cool, calculating, but there was something behind it, something more human than Elias had expected. Elias stepped closer to the communicator, his voice low but insistent. "Because if you don't, we'll all be dead. The rebels don't care who they kill. We need a way out, and you're the only one who can give it to us." Another pause. Then Valora's voice softened slightly. "I know the way. I know the routes through the mountains, the caves that lead to the ship. But it's dangerous. The path is filled with traps, and the rebels know them too. If we're caught—" "We won't be caught," Elias interrupted. "We'll be smart. We have to be." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Valora spoke. "All right, I'll help you. But know this, Elias. If anything goes wrong, I won't hesitate to leave you behind. Understood?" Elias nodded. "Understood." The communicator shut off with a soft click, and the room fell silent. Serana looked at Elias, her face still unreadable. "Do you trust her?" Elias sighed, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "I have to. Right now, she's our best shot at getting out alive." With Valora's help secured, Elias and Serana made their way to the designated meeting point. The corridor was dark, and the air was thick with tension. Every step they took felt like it could be their last. They knew the rebels would be looking for them. After all, Serana was the last of the royal bloodline. If they captured her, they would control the entire Aurelian Empire. When they reached the rendezvous point, a shadowy figure appeared in the distance. Valora. She was tall and imposing, with dark, piercing eyes and a sharp, calculating look. She wore the dark armor of an Aurelian general, her posture regal but menacing. Despite the calm exterior, Elias could see the fire in her eyes, a fire that matched his own. "You made it," Valora said, her voice quiet but firm. "I didn't think you'd be able to make it through the lower tunnels without being spotted." Elias stepped forward. "We've had some close calls, but we're here. What's next?" Valora glanced at Serana, her gaze flicking between her and Elias. "You two have guts. I'll give you that. But the hard part starts now. The path to the ship isn't just dangerous, it's nearly impossible to navigate without the right skills. We'll need to move fast and stay low. The rebels are everywhere." Elias nodded. "We're ready." "Good," Valora said with a nod. "Follow me, and stay close. I don't have time to babysit." They moved quickly through the dark corridors, Valora leading the way. With her knowledge of the compound's hidden routes, they navigated through narrow passageways and secret tunnels, avoiding the rebel patrols that had taken over the area. For the first time since they'd been forced into hiding, Elias felt a sense of hope. With Valora's help, they might actually make it out alive. But Elias knew one thing for sure. The real battle was just beginning, and he had no idea what it would cost them all in the end. The journey through the tunnels had been silent but tense. Elias could hear his own breath echoing in the cold darkness, the sound of his boots on the stone floor loud in his ears. He glanced at Serana, walking beside him. Her usual royal composure had cracked. Now she was focused entirely on survival. The princess, who had once walked among the stars in luxurious halls, was now nothing more than a survivor like Elias. Valora led the way, her sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every crack in the walls. The rebel forces were closing in on their position, and the air was thick with anticipation. Every step was a gamble, and Elias knew it. "How much farther?" Elias asked, his voice low but firm. Valora didn't answer immediately. She just kept moving, her strides steady and controlled. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "We're close. The caves that lead to the ship are just ahead, but we're not alone. The rebels know this area better than we do." Elias nodded. He knew that the real challenge lay ahead. Escaping wasn't just about getting out of the compound. The harder part would be surviving the treacherous path that led to the ship, and the countless dangers along the way. They reached a narrow passage that opened into a dark cavern. The walls were damp, dripping with water, and the smell of earth, and stone filled the air. Elias couldn't see much, but he could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on them. "We'll rest here," Valora said, her voice commanding. "It's safer in the caves for now." Elias felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It had been a long day. No, a long series of days. The constant movement, the fear, the pressure of keeping Serana alive, it was all beginning to take a toll. But there was no time for rest, no time for weakness. He glanced at Serana, who was standing a little apart from the group, staring into the shadows. Her golden eyes seemed distant, lost in thought. Elias wondered what was going through her mind. She was the princess, the one who was supposed to be in charge. But now, she was relying on him for her survival. It felt strange, like the weight of the universe had shifted. "How are you holding up?" Elias asked softly, stepping closer to her. Serana didn't look at him immediately, but when she did, there was a faint smile on her lips. "I'm alive," she said quietly. "For now." Elias offered a small, reassuring smile in return, though inside, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing harder. They couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Just then, Valora spoke again. "We need to keep moving. The rebels will be here soon. If we want to make it to the ship, we'll have to take the high ground." Elias stood, ready to move. He couldn't let his guard down, not now. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, never went away. Valora led them deeper into the caves, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent years navigating the darkness. The further they went, the more difficult the terrain became. The air grew heavier and the silence was oppressive. But in the distance, Elias could hear the sound of running water, a stream or river. That meant they were getting closer to their destination. They came to a narrow, jagged path that led upward. The rocks were sharp and the climb was steep, but Valora moved as if she had been here 1,000 times before. Serana struggled a little more, her royal boots ill-suited for the rough terrain. Elias reached out to steady her, his hand on her arm as she stumbled. "Careful," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Serana nodded, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with something Elias couldn't quite place. Was it gratitude? Or something else? They reached the top of the rocky path and looked out over the expanse of the cave. The air here felt fresher, though the tension remained. Valora crouched, peering out from behind a large rock. She motioned for the others to do the same. "Stay low," she instructed. "There are rebel patrols in the area. If we're spotted, we're done." Elias and Serana crouched down beside her, their bodies pressed close to the cold stone. Elias could see the faint glow of torchlight in the distance, flickering through the darkness. He could feel the pressure building. They were so close. But the rebels weren't far behind. "How long until we can move?" Elias whispered to Valora. "Not long," Valora replied, her voice tense. "We'll wait until the patrol passes, then we can make a run for the ship. But we'll have to be fast." Minutes felt like hours as they waited in the dark, the sound of the rebels' footsteps growing louder. Elias's muscles ached, his body frozen in place. The anticipation was unbearable. Finally, the patrol moved past, their voices muffled as they disappeared into the distance. Valora motioned for them to move. "Now, go!" The three of them moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. As they made their way across the open cavern, Elias could hear his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His every step was measured, his eyes scanning every corner. The ship was just ahead. They were so close. But just as they neared the edge of the cavern, a voice rang out from the darkness. "There they are!" Elias's heart stopped. The rebels had found them. "Move!" Valora shouted, her voice full of urgency. "We have to get to the ship now!" They ran, their footsteps echoing in the cavern, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. Elias pushed himself harder, his legs burning with the effort. He could see the faint outline of the ship ahead, just a little farther. But the rebels were closing in, their blaster fire lighting up the darkness. A shot rang out, missing Elias by inches. He ducked behind a rock, barely avoiding the blast. Valora fired back, but the rebels kept coming, relentless in their pursuit. "We're almost there!" Elias shouted. He could see the ship now, the glowing lights of its engines just ahead. But they were too far from the safety of the ship, and the rebels were getting closer. "Stay close!" Valora barked, taking the lead again. Elias and Serana followed, their breaths heavy with fear. This was it. This was the final stretch. If they didn't make it to the ship in time, they were done. They reached the ship's landing platform just as the rebels were almost upon them. Valora fired once more, taking down 2 of the attackers. "Get inside!" she yelled, her voice a roar in the chaos. Elias reached the ship first, pulling Serana behind him. They ducked inside, and Valora followed. Slamming the door behind her, the ship's engines roared to life, and they were off. The rebel forces could only watch as they disappeared into the stars. Elias collapsed into a seat, his chest heaving. They had made it. Serana sat beside him, her face pale but relieved. She looked at him, her golden eyes full of emotion. "You did it," she whispered. "You kept us alive!" Elias didn't know what to say. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in days, he allowed himself a moment of peace. They had made it. But the real test was still ahead. Could he really become the leader Serana believed him to be? The ship soared through the stars, its engines humming steadily as it left the planet behind. Elias sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the controls. The stars outside were calm, distant pinpricks of light. But within, the tension was still thick. They had made it out of the rebel-held caves, but the danger wasn't over. The Empire was in turmoil, and the true test was just beginning. Beside him, Serana sat in silence. She had been quiet ever since they had escaped, her eyes gazing out the viewports. The golden glow of her eyes, usually so full of life, seemed dimmer now, weighed down by everything they had gone through. Elias glanced at her, wondering what was going through her mind. "You okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. Serana turned her head slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I'm alive," she said quietly, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "For now, that's enough." Elias gave her a small nod. He understood. They had been through too much in too little time. The escape, the dangers, the rebels, they had all led to this moment. But they had no idea what waited for them next. He switched on the comms. "Valora, what's our status?" A crackling voice came through. "We're safe for now. The ship's systems are working fine. We'll be out of the system soon, but I'm tracking a few rebel ships in pursuit. They'll catch up, but we'll outrun them." Elias relaxed slightly, though his grip on the controls remained tight. The chase was far from over, but it was a small victory that they were safe for the moment. "Any idea where we're heading?" Elias asked. Valora's voice came back, calm and steady. "There's a remote outpost on the edge of the galaxy. It's neutral territory, and the people there don't take sides in galactic wars. They might help us, but they'll be wary of you. If you want to stay out of sight, it's the best place." Elias looked at Serana. "It's our only option for now. We need to rest, regroup, and figure out what comes next." Serana nodded slowly, her eyes still distant. "We can't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, someone will come looking for me." Elias knew she was right. She was the last of her royal line, and the rebels, the Empress's enemies, whoever had been chasing them, would stop at nothing to find her. They couldn't hide forever. But maybe they could use that time to gather strength, to build a plan. "We'll make it work," Elias said, trying to reassure her. "One step at a time." Hours passed as the ship sailed through the quiet emptiness of space. The stars outside were a vast, silent witness to their journey. Elias didn't know where the future would take them, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, something he didn't fully understand, but something he couldn't ignore. As they neared the edge of the galaxy, the ship's sensors began to beep, signaling the approach of another ship. The pilot's voice came through the comms. "This is Outpost 47. We've received your signal. Prepare for docking." Elias exhaled, relieved. They were close now. "Got it," he said, steering the ship into position. The landing bay of the outpost was visible now, a large docking area filled with strange, unfamiliar ships. As they landed, Elias felt the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just a hiding spot. This was a place to decide their future. The ship touched down with a soft thud, the engines powering down as they came to a stop. Elias unbuckled his seatbelt, his body sore from the long hours of flight. He stood up and turned to Serana, who was still seated, her hands clasped in her lap. "We've made it," he said quietly. Serana looked at him, her gaze still distant, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes now. "For now, yes, but this is only the beginning, Elias. I can't keep running forever. Sooner or later, someone will come looking for me. The Empire won't rest until they have me back." Elias nodded. He understood the gravity of the situation, but he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. "Then we'll fight," he said simply. "But we'll fight on our terms." Serana's lips quirked into a small smile. "You always say that, don't you?" "We'll fight," Elias smiled back. "Because it's true. We won't let them control us. Not again." The door of the ship opened with a soft hiss, and Valora stepped out first, scanning the area for any signs of danger. She waved them forward. "Let's go," Valora said, her voice low but commanding. "We'll be safer inside the outpost." Elias followed her out of the ship, Serana close behind. The outpost was a strange, barren place, with buildings that looked like they had been thrown together in a hurry. But it was functional. It was safe, for now. They made their way to the entrance of the central building, a tall structure made of steel and glass. Inside, a group of workers and soldiers went about their business, none of them paying much attention to the newcomers. Valora led them to a back room, where they could discuss their next move in private. "We need to get the word out," Valora said once they were seated. "We need allies. The more people who know your story, Serana, the more likely we'll find supporters." Serana shook her head. "I don't want to involve anyone else. Not yet. Not until we know who we can trust." Elias spoke up, his voice firm. "We can't hide. Forever. You can't lead a kingdom by hiding from the truth. People need to know who you are. They need to understand that the rebels are a threat, not just to you, but to everyone." Serana looked at him, her eyes softening for a moment. "I know, but I'm not ready to tell everyone. Not yet." Elias understood. It was hard to trust anyone after everything they had been through, but he also knew that staying hidden forever wasn't an option. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said. "But we need to prepare. We need to find a way to fight back," Serana nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "We will. But we do it my way. We do it smart." The following days passed in a blur of preparation and planning. The outpost, though small, became a base of operations for Elias and Serana. They spoke with the few people who had remained loyal to Serana, gathering intelligence and trying to understand the strength of the rebel forces. Valora proved to be a valuable ally, always offering insight and strategy. It wasn't long before they realized the true scale of the problem. The rebels were everywhere. They had supporters in the highest places of the Empire, and their reach extended far beyond what Elias or Serana had imagined. But amidst the chaos, something began to shift. Elias could feel it in the air, a spark of hope. He wasn't sure how or when, but he knew that the battle for the Empire was only just beginning. And in the center of it all, Serana stood, the once captive princess now becoming the leader she was always meant to be. As they prepared for the next phase of their journey, Elias stood by the window of their temporary quarters, looking out at the stars. It was hard to see the future clearly, but one thing was certain. They weren't giving up. Not now, not ever. And somewhere in the distance, far beyond the reach of the outpost, the lights of the galaxy waited to be ignited once again.